me know when am I good to start?
Yeah, you can go ahead and kick things off.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this presentation today. I'm Rob McConnell. I'll give you a little bit of my history here in a few minutes. But today we're going to be talking about sustainable design, construction, and operation of parking facilities. Here's a little brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to introduce myself and just briefly reintroduce WGI to you, because I'm sure most of you guys know WGI. And we're going to talk a little bit about, what sustainability is and why you might want to design, construct, and operate sustainably. For those of you who have been through any kind of LEED credentialing process, some of this will look pretty familiar to you, but bear with me. And then we're going to cover a little bit about sustainability according to the Green Building Council, the USGBC, and how LEED sort of transitioned into Parksmart, which is now the new sustainable design benchmark for parking facilities. And then we're going to finish up with a bunch of potential strategies for how to design, construct, and operate sustainably according to the Parksmart certification process. The bulk of this presentation is actually going to focus on the strategy part of it. So, who am I? As I said, my name's Rob McConnell. I'm one of the principals in our parking group, and I've been a parking consultant for pretty close to 28 years at this point. And I've been with WGI for most of that. Before that, I was a transportation-focused guy. My background is in structural engineering, but at some point along the way, I got corrupted and became a parking consultant. And I am a PE in a bunch of different states, and have done approximately 400, probably close to 420, 430 parking projects over the course of my career for everybody that you can possibly imagine. WGI, we're a multidiscipline engineering focused company focused on transportation systems and engineering, structural engineering, parking design, environmental engineering, all kinds of different things, parking restoration and the like. So any project that you might have that has transportation focused design, planning, engineering associated with it, we can certainly do that. So let's, any questions about me or WGI before we jump right into to the definition of sustainability? Right. Let's see, there's something in the chat. Let me look. Are there any CE hours for those with GBCI credentials? I think you could claim an hour of training for this one, and we'd be happy to provide you with a certificate. Just be sure to request it. So jumping right in, what is sustainability? The concept of sustainability, or at least the terminology for sustainability, came out of the Brundtland Commission of the UN back in the 80s, I believe it was. And they defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that's sort of what informs all sustainable policy here. Sustainability is consensus based. We're not doing anything weird or experimental. It's market driven. It's not intended to go against market forces, cost and desirability. It is voluntary, at least for now. I know that the ICC, the International Code Committee, has a green building code, but it has not been formally adopted, although there are various municipalities that have zoning ordinances and planning and zoning requirements that have incorporated a variety of sustainable requirements over the years. So that's why I caveat voluntary, and it's using proven technologies. Again, not doing something that's experimental or weird. Although if you do something particularly innovative, you do have the opportunity to get LEED credits on your project or Parksmart credits on your project. When we talk about sustainable design, we talk about achieving the triple bottom line, preserving, being environmentally sensible, being socially responsible, and making economic sense. And where all those three meet in the middle, that's considered to be a sustainable project. And again, for those of you with any kind of LEED credentialing or experience doing sustainable design, this is pretty familiar territory, I would think. So why would you want to design and construct and operate something sustainable or in a sustainable way? There are really four major approaches to this, and presumably you would have some combination of reasons that encompassed some or all of these four, or some of these four. The first would be a cost-driven approach to sustainability. Incorporating sustainable elements in your project in order to drive down costs, by having energy efficient systems and good insulation and all those sort of things. You're going to decrease your operating cost by building with durable systems, repurposing existing buildings and improving them. You're going to hypothetically reduce your maintenance cost, increase building value, and with desirable properties, occupancies will increase. And when occupancies increase, rent increases. So those are all bottom line kind of things. The other aspect of sustainable design from a cost-driven perspective would be the opportunity to take advantage of tax incentives and rebates for things like photovoltaic power and electric vehicles and the like. So there's money that can be saved, money that can be made, and money that can be taken advantage of on the incentive side. And that would be the cost-driven approach. Another approach might be the health-driven approach. People spend about 90% of their time indoors, and granted, parking's not technically indoors most of the time, but it does have somewhat of an indoor environment. Indoor pollutants are substantially higher than outdoor pollutants typically, and you would want your building to be a reasonably healthy building and that means products and coatings and finishes and floor coverings that all have low VOCs and are ideally naturally sourced and pleasant to be around and in. The types of owners that might be particularly drawn to a health-driven approach would be sort of folks in the healthcare industry, and then folks like Earth Fare or Whole Foods or something where they're promoting healthy space, along with any office buildings or anything else. A third approach to sustainability, a third reason why you might adopt a sustainable approach to design, constructing and operating, is the concept of environmental stewardship, that we have responsibility to protect the natural resources and the planet that we have for ourselves and for our children, and address climate change and rising sea levels and all that type of thing to the extent that we can. And green buildings generally emit less carbon dioxide. They use less energy. If they're constructed according to the LEED approach or the Parksmart approach, you're not building in green fields. You're building, you're doing urban infill. You're adaptively reusing existing buildings. You're not contributing to urban sprawl. You're doing things densely and taking advantage of all the vibrant mix of uses in a particular setting, to keep the natural areas natural to the extent that we can. And then this is somewhat more cynical. I've got a few little funny cartoons here that I'm not going to read to you, but you can read them on your own here. The fourth reason you might want to design, construct, and operate sustainably is the sort of the self-promotion, the virtue signaling, if you will. And sometimes people call that greenwashing, but basically doing a lot of things that say we're green or that we're sustainable, but maybe aren't necessarily exactly that. All right. There are potential barriers to sustainable design, construction, operation, and among them are the time it takes to the time and the cost it takes to actually design in these features, documentation in order to get consensus that we have in fact produced something that is sustainably that's going to sustainably operate and be sustainable. It takes a lot of time. It does actually cost a little bit extra to do something. Now that the kind of the basic at this point in time, most of the materials and techniques that are practiced today and available today have a lot of sustainable manufacturing and whatnot kind of baked into the cake at this point. So it's not because we've been doing this now for 20 years or more. People are familiar with what it takes to check the boxes, so to speak, for the different types of sustainable design criteria, and so at its basic level, it doesn't really cost any extra to be sustainable. But if you wanted to go the extra mile, so to speak, I'm using LEED as kind of the benchmark here. If you were going for LEED Gold, including all those extra features, you might expect to pay a couple, few percent more. And then for LEED Platinum, which is the platinum standard, if you will, you might expect to pay as much as 10% more for those features to be incorporated. And then the fees for certification aren't cheap either. They're based on the type and size of the building, and you can get up to about 23 grand at this point. Last time I checked for certification fees. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay. One last thing would be making a specific case for sustainable design, construction and operation for parking specifically. Why would we want to focus on parking? Aren't cars ultimately evil, and won't we phase them out and not have to worry about them? Well, single occupancy vehicles aren't going anywhere anytime soon. There's nearly 300 million registered in the U.S., and they're expected to keep on increasing. And with the some of the trends that we were seeing 4 or 5 years ago with ride sharing and sort of the densification of living and work and play have been somewhat delayed maybe by the COVID pandemic. So for the foreseeable future, we're going to have personal single occupancy vehicles. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to handle them as best we can, and design as in a way that's environmentally friendly, understanding that we've still got to accommodate the single occupancy vehicle. The typical passenger car emits a fair amount of CO2 every year. I think vehicles account, I think, for the majority of the CO2 emissions in the United States, and then I think power plants are second after that. But how do we mitigate? How do we offset? What can we do to make the parking facilities in such a way that they encourage sustainable behavior? Q&A. Details and origins of the graph. Sorry, I didn't edit that in. There was a graph I pulled off of the internet 6-8 months ago, so they may have updated right now. And I don't remember the origins, but I can send that to you if you would like me to. Okay. So sustainability, according to GBCI, this is a little history of where LEED and GBCI came from. The GBCI and the US GBC are the organizations that oversee the not only the LEED certification process, but also the Parksmart certification process. The concept for having an organization or group of organizations that monitored and encouraged sustainable design. Was first proposed in 1993 by a guy named Robert Watson within RDC. And then after several years of putting together prototyping, they came up with the first LEED standard in 1998. We're on I believe 4.1 at this point. And just so that you understand the distinction between the U.S. Green Building Council and the Green Business Certification Incorporated, the U.S. GBC comes up with the rating system and the reference guides and everything, and then the GBCI kind of handles the certification process and the administration of the exams and administration of the certification. They're sort of the money wing. GBCI, US GBC have a variety of certification standards for different types of systems and projects. The one that most everybody's familiar with is LEED, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. All these are acronyms, kind of cute acronyms. SITES, which is basically the site design and landscaping aspect of it. And I didn't include all of them here. There's more. You can go and look up yourself, but just to kind of run the gamut of different types of projects. There's a certification standard for power generation and so on and so forth. The one that we're probably most interested in is the Parksmart, at least that I'm most interested in because I'm a parking guy, is the Parksmart standard. And you can think of Parksmart as LEED for parking. As I mentioned, we're on LEED version 4.1 at this time. It went into effect late January in 2019. It applies to new construction, major renovation. There's also a core and shell, which is kind of a little separate type of LEED certification. You can also do existing buildings, and then they also have a whole variety of specific schools, retail, healthcare, et cetera, that you can get specific LEED certification for. In, I want to say June of 2010, literally about maybe 6 weeks after I got my my LEED accreditation, the US GBC came out with a supplemental supplemental direction that basically said standalone parking structures cannot be LEED certified. They can still contribute to the LEED certification of the overall complex, but they can't be LEED certified in and of themselves. I like to think that I'm at least partially responsible for that, because not long before that supplemental directions came out, we had submitted a parking garage for platinum certification. That would have been, I believe, the only platinum certified garage in the world, frankly. They didn't give us platinum; they gave us LEED, and we became one of, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 maybe LEED gold certified garages in the world. Also, at that time, one of our competitors came out with a garage in Durham, North Carolina, for Duke University that received LEED certification, and it had technically had no occupied space in it. So there was some consternation about parking garages and why they, should they be allowed to be LEED certified. In the industry, in the parking industry, we all thought that when they issued that supplemental guidance that was a little short-sighted, because, as I mentioned previously, cars are here and they're going to be here for the foreseeable future. And gee whiz, shouldn't we be encouraging people to design construct and operate sustainably. So through the competing, I guess I wouldn't call it competing, but a certification standard kind of grew out of the fact that there was, you no longer could get LEED certified. And then in about 2015, that certification standard was purchased by GBCI and became the Parksmart certification as we now know it. There's a lot of overlap between Parksmart and LEED, and in fact, if you're doing a mixed-use facility or a complex that has multiple buildings, you can, at least theoretically, get LEED certification for your overall project, and then also get Parksmart certification for the parking aspects of that project. The overlaps, I mean, just for example, here's a list of things that overlap that you can get points for both certification standards. And it's the reporting system's a little different, but close enough to where reporting and documenting those particular characteristics would be pretty straightforward. I will, before we get into the specifics of sustainable design for parking and the Parksmart standard, I will say that in my experience, whereas LEED certification is very design and construction focused, and by that I mean, you as the designer, you incorporate this system or that system or this material or this technique, and as the contractor, you engage these folks or you buy from this source and so on and so forth. With the intent that once the facility is built and up and running, it will operate sustainably. And of course, you have to commission it and so on and so forth. Parksmart tends to be much more operations focused. And in order to get Parksmart certification for a building, you really have to document that the operations are going in a certain way, and in some cases for several months beyond the opening of the facility. So it becomes a little challenging sometimes, especially if you are not entirely sure who's going to be operating the facility once you, as the designer, you walk away from it. So I will say that. So as we're looking through these things, these strategies for sustainable design, just kind of keep that in mind, because a lot of them are operations centric. Any questions before I move on to the specific strategies? All right. One specific strategy that is right out of LEED is the concept of sustainable sites. You don't want to take a green field and in the immortal words of Joni Mitchell, we put up a parking lot. Pave paradise, put up a parking lot. So anything you do really wants to be urban infill, redeveloping brownfields, really being near other uses rather than putting something out in the middle of suburbia. Actually, the number one strategy probably the simplest strategy for sustainable design is actually to not have any free parking, to make sure that you are charging for parking, and that's one of the fundamental measures that you have to, if you want to achieve Parksmart certification, and frankly, sustainable design is make people understand that there is a cost associated with parking. And as Don Shoup, the professor from USC or Cal, Berkeley, I can't remember exactly where he is, but he says he likes to say that there's 8 parking spaces for every vehicle, and it's just not sustainable, and we don't need to build any more parking. I wouldn't go to that extreme, but having people understand that there is a cost associated with building a space for you that's convenient for you to park your car. It's part of educating people that what they're doing, or at least informing people, are allowing them to decide perhaps not to drive because of the parking costs, and thereby reducing congestion and making the land available for use for something else. So that's the number one strategy. Another strategy on the management side of things would be minimizing parking, only building the amount of parking that you really need. The image on the right is your typical old school shopping mall, which has this massive sea of parking. And historically, zoning ordinances would require you to provide that much parking, which is based typically on the 85th percentile day, with 100% occupancy of all the different uses within that retail development or mixed use development, and what you get is that the vast majority of the time, nobody's parking in most of those parking spaces. I mean, this might be a typical Thursday at 11 o'clock in the morning. UCLA, sorry. Yeah, Jim, thanks. Appreciate that. I couldn't remember. I knew it was one of those Western campuses. Sorry. Don Shoup is a professor at UCLA. You want to use the resources that you have, shared parking, and I'll touch on shared parking here in a second, to minimize the amount of parking and to put it somewhere where you can maximize open space. And the image on the left is the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which we put a 1,500 car parking garage, 1,502 spaces in this image. And gee whiz, where are those parking spaces? Well, in this case, they're actually under that big lawn right in front of the building that used to be a giant parking lot, surface parking lot. So we created a nice space and put the parking where it was best used, the best use of that space. So shared parking, I mentioned that a minute ago, and what shared parking is taking advantage of the mix of uses that you would have in a facility, and understanding that certain uses have overlapping occupancies, but certain uses have occupancies that sort of are the inverse of each other. And the classic example in the sort of the histograms in the image below would be the office and hotel sort of model where if you think about an office, or a parking facility serving an office, and these graphs represent occupancy during the day. So if the day starts on the left side of that diagram, sometime around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, people start to arrive. And then at some point at maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, it's at maximum occupancy. And then there's a little dip down for lunch as people go out to grab lunch and go to lunch meetings and so on and so forth. And then there's back around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it peaks again, but maybe not quite as high because, people are out, having meetings and whatnot. And then at some time around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the occupancy starts to dwindle down. And by 8 o'clock at night, there's almost nobody there. Contrast that with the hotel occupancy in the little graph below it. And that, overnight, you've got maximum occupancy, but starting around, 5 o'clock in the morning or so, people start to leave and go to their destination, their meetings or whatever. Depending on the kind of hotel, you might have a little bump in the middle of the day for lunch, or perhaps you're bringing in extra staff to clean and housekeep, and then sometime 2 o'clock in the afternoon, occupancy starts to creep back up. So if you were to take those two graphs and just in your mind flip the office graph inverted upside down, you see it kind of fits nicely into that spot, that gap in the occupancy of the hotel. And the idea of shared parking is that you take those two, you marry them together, and you come up with a combined maximum, and you only build that amount of parking. And it works with different uses, and every use has got its own little sort of idiosyncrasies and peculiarities. But the idea is to consolidate that down, and only build as much parking as you need. And most zoning codes actually allow you. Zoning codes are either silent on it or they actually allow you to do it explicitly. And the Urban Land Institute, National Parking Association shared parking model. So I think it's the second edition. I believe we got the third edition, or second edition, maybe the most recent one. Ben Sands would correct me if. But anyway, that's a good resource for shared parking. As far as other ways to manage your demand, minimizing parking. Another way to minimize parking is through transportation demand management, TDM, which is basically incentivizing people to take alternate modes of transit. Or alternate modes of transportation, either bike, walk, scooter, carpool, vanpool, ride share, take public transit. And an example of how you might do this is, an employer might say, well, if you agree to not drive your car, but on rare occasion we'll give you a free bus pass, or alternatively, if you don't drive, the parking fee doesn't get taken out of your paycheck every month. Other strategies, putting bike lockers in facilities to change and shower, and so on and so forth. So encouraging alternative modes of transportation. Another strategy, this is very similar to LEAD, is having a program in place where you're using sustainably sourced products in your operations, products that are friendly to the environment. Also having a very prominent recycling program, and educating people about that recycling program, and educating people about sustainable design in general. Another management strategy would be proactive maintenance. I think this is a good idea to do whether you're you're interested in sustainable design or not, because the more proactively you maintain your facility, the longer it's going to be around, and the less you have to spend on patching and sealing things. Again, NPA, National Parking Association, has a great publication on maintaining parking structures, and even going as far as to having a matrix, a schedule, do this on this, do this daily, do this weekly, do these tasks, monthly, semi-annually, and so on and so forth. And we always encourage, once a facility gets to be a few years old, to have a professional visually review it, and help you stay on top of things, because if you defer repairs and defer maintenance, they deteriorate exponentially, and something that doesn't look bad today, within a couple of years, could turn into something pretty nasty. So, got to be proactive there. Commissioning of systems. Commissioning of systems is the same as it was, or as it would be in LEED. The idea, for those of you that aren't familiar with commissioning, is that you design and you plan and install a system that's energy efficient and it operates efficiently, and so on and so forth. But then once it's installed, you need to double check that it's doing what it's had claimed to do, and that's what commissioning is. It's checking to make sure things are set up right, that they're performing correctly, and that they're operating the way that they're supposed to. Another management strategy is construction waste management. Again, this is very similar to LEED. Parksmart and LEED have very similar criteria. The idea is to divert as much waste away from the landfill and into the recycle stream as practical. Another management strategy is related to the materials and resources that you're using in your facility. And got a couple images to the right. The top one is showing structural fibers in the concrete. Structural fibers are a great way to increase the toughness and durability of concrete, and those are a recycled material. Those come out of some of the fibers come out of the carpet manufacturing industry. Some come out of the steel manufacturing industry, depending on what you're doing there. But generally speaking, it's a good strategy. And frankly, we're using a lot of, especially the non-metallic fibers in parking facilities, because in lieu of reinforcement on the slab on grade in particular, they don't corrode. So it's doing double duty as a recycled material, and also as prolonging the life of the structure and contributing to the good repair and maintenance of the structure. The image in the bottom right, that's fly ash, which is a product of the coal burning industry. And it's a pozzolan material. You add it to concrete, and it's very, very fine. It fills in the pores and makes the concrete more dense, if you will. Concrete, you can think of concrete as a sponge. It's a hard sponge, and it's got little pockets in there where moisture and salt and whatnot can get into. And fly ash or granulated blast furnace slag, which is a part of this, comes out of the steel industry, ground up very fine. They fill those little gaps and those little pores in the concrete and prevent or help prevent water and contaminants from getting into concrete. Another thing, and again, these are very similar to LEED. Regional materials is also very similar to LEED. in that you're procuring something. You're not shipping it halfway around the world. You're procuring something regionally, locally, and elements like your ready mix concrete are usually coming from somewhere local. Precast is typically coming, from a couple 100 miles away at the most, and so those are good sustainable design construction strategies. Moving on to programs, and I realize we're about 15 minutes here, and so I will make sure that I respect your time, and we'll get through this. We've got a handful more slides to go. The first part that we talked about was management. The second kind of heading would be programs, and one program is proximity to one potential program strategy would be putting your parking facility with convenient access to mass transit, and intermodal facilities are kind of the classic example of this. We've done a ton of those recently. I'm working on a bunch of them right now in Charlotte. Another program strategy would be incorporating wayfinding in general, but also dynamic wayfinding and advanced parking guidance. I don't know if any of you are familiar with or seen anything like the images along the bottom there. The one on the far right is one we did at Colorado State University, where technology is in the garage to detect whether parking spaces are occupied. Once the system understands whether a space is occupied or not, it has a red, green LED light above each space, and the green LED light indicates that the space is available. Red would indicate it's occupied, and then that information can also be pushed out and is pushed out to variable message signage within the facility saying, there's so many spaces available here and so many spaces available over there. And then it also is typically pushed out to the monument signage at the edge of the facility near the entrances, like the image on the right, that tells you there's so many spaces available on this floor, that floor, and that floor. And then extending beyond that, you can push that information out to mobile apps or web. Somebody wants to know if you have parking available in your system, they can log on to your mobile app or your website and get it. It also allows the owner to sell parking, or the operator to sell parking to third-party vendors like Spot Hero or other reservation type systems that go out and hunt for parking spaces that are available and sell them to people. Traffic flow planning, especially during events, is key. And this is also a strategy criteria, making sure that you know where cars are going on a regular basis, and you know where they're going on during special events, and making sure that things are flowing efficiently and effectively, and not gumming up the works. Another type of program would be a car share type program. I don't know if you're familiar with, you might be familiar with Lime Bikes, but Lime also has a car sharing service, and as do many others, Enterprise and variety of other providers allow you to basically do very short-term rentals, where you just through the app, pick up the car. The cars are just parked around, and you can get in through the app and use the car for an hour or two, and then park it and certain places, and having that type of program available on site is what the strategy would be. And then also providing space in circulation, perhaps, for ride sharing, like Uber, Lyft, and others. Another strategy in the program, under the program category, would be providing preferred parking for fuel-efficient vehicles and electric vehicles, putting those spaces front and center so that you're encouraging people to purchase fuel-efficient vehicles and electric vehicles because they get the best parking. And part of that is identifying those spaces as being reserved for those types of vehicles. Another program would be any fleet vehicles. If you operate, if as an owner or as an operator you have fleet vehicles, using alternative fuel fleet vehicles, and that might be electric, or it might be natural gas, biodiesel, things like that. Accommodating bicycles is another strategy. Most zoning ordinances actually require you to provide bicycles these days, or parking or storage for bicycles. That usually means a bike rack or two to satisfy the code minimum. But beyond that, you want to provide nice, safe area for them to be stored, secure. The image in the middle there shows bike lockers where you could store your bike overnight. The image on the left is private parking with bike storage associated with the different parking spaces. Another part of this strategy is providing basic tools and a pump to pump up your tires and do repairs on your bike, because all bikes need some level of maintenance associated with them, and just providing that convenience would be kind of part and parcel with the strategy. Moving on to technology and design. One of the features that can be incorporated are parking access and revenue control systems that minimize in-lane transaction time. So basically, trying to keep cars from sitting in the access aisle, idling while people are fiddling with their credit card, or God forbid, change or dollar bills trying to pay in lane. The idea is to minimize the transaction time, and having no equipment is the ideal there, allowing free flow in and out. But where gated systems are necessary, having a great strategy would be to have the automated vehicle ID system in place, or the toll tag system, where you don't actually have to transact with anything. You can see in this particular image up here, you can see the transponders, the antennas up here above the lane, reading the transponders in the vehicle, and bending the gate without anybody having to do anything. And then also you could, some of the prepay, pay on foot really can improve the flow of vehicles through the system. Air quality, similar to LEED, you want no smoking in the facility. You want to use low VOC materials, and any kind of indoor space like parking offices or whatever, retail space or whatever is incorporated into the facility. Those need to be ventilated and the VOCs flushed out before they're occupied. Tire inflation, providing tire inflation on site is a good strategy. Costco, most Costco's have that for free. Electric vehicle charging. I know that that's a hot topic right now, and there's a lot of discussion of how much is the right amount of electric vehicle charging to include. The current forecasts project that in about by 2030, the EVs will make up 5 to 7% of the vehicles on the road, and a lot of municipalities and a few states have already established minimum number of EV chargers required for each parking facility. And everyone's a little different, and you get into the difference between EV ready, EV capable, EV installed. But for what it's worth, the 2021 version of the International Green Construction Code, IGCC, does address the minimum number of charging stations required, and for all occupancies except for for most occupancies except for residential, they're suggesting 4% of the total or 8% of employee parking spaces be EV ready, and then for residential 20% be total EV ready. I think most of the places in California right now require that for residential 100% of the spaces have EV charging, at least at the 110 volt already incorporated. Another technological or design aspect would be natural ventilation. You do not want to incorporate mechanical ventilation if you can avoid it. It's expensive to operate. It's expensive to maintain. And the way you do that basically is designing the perimeter to have 20% of the surface area, projected surface area for every level open, minimum of 20%, distributed around 40% of the perimeter. And there's different. The images here. This is Missoula, Montana, garage we did a few years ago, and it's just illustrating to you that even though the garage might look closed, we're still able to achieve openness using perforated panels and strategically located slots and so on and so forth. So natural ventilation. Another technology would be use of daylight harvesting via the way the lights are circuited, such that the exterior fixtures can turn on and off, while to take advantage of where the position of the sun is and take advantage of the ambient light from outside. This can be done with photocell sensors, but probably more commonly and more reliable are the light control, the timer type systems that adjust based on the time of year. And then these days, most of the projects we're doing incorporate the dimming light fixtures with the occupancy sensors incorporated into them. I would advocate, though, if you're going to do that, to zone those so that when the occupancy sensor is tripped, it lights up an area rather than just one set of fixtures. And you never want to turn the lights completely off because there's always security to be concerned about within a parking facility, especially a public parking facility. few more things here. I know we're about at the end of our time. I just wanted to run through a few more slides here really quickly. Strategies include stormwater management. For quantity, you can use pervious pavement. You can use detention within a facility or next to a facility. And then quality, like rain gardens and bioswales, sand oil separators. Those are appropriate design strategies. Rainwater harvesting. Now, in some areas, this is not legal. I know I lived in Colorado for a number of years before coming back east, and technically you didn't own the rain that fell on your property unless you owned 5 acres or more. And so rainwater harvesting was not allowed, but in most places it is. And that's basically capturing rainwater and then using it for primarily irrigation of your plantings. If you have occupied spaces with restrooms in it, using low flow fixtures, and then gray water reuse would be using the stuff that comes out of the sink or showers or whatever, not the black water, which is the stuff that comes out of the toilets and the kitchen sink, but using that also as irrigation for your landscaping. And then in general, using water efficient landscaping, making sure that you're using native plant species, not something exotic that requires a whole lot of unusual amount of water for your area. Roof design, that's another strategy. Roofs, green roofs and blue roofs and white roofs help mitigate the heat island effect, which is basically concrete and asphalt or giant heat sinks. A blue roof is basically using the top level of your structure for stormwater detention, basically storing water up there. Green roofs, as you can see in this image up in Red Deer, Alberta, it's got sedum planted on that barrel arch roof, and then there's some sedum planted on another section that you can't see in this photo. But the idea there is to do something that helps sequester CO2, and in certain circumstances, you can actually put public park type space or something that the public can actually sit in and enjoy. And then also, anytime you put a roof on a facility, it's going to help keep cars cool and prevent fuel evaporation. And also on hot days, when you crank the car up, it's not going to be as hot as if it were exposed in the sun. And so your AC doesn't have to work quite as hard. Another strategy would be on-site energy generation. Project on the left is Colorado State University. It's a different Colorado State University job from the one I showed earlier. But you can see it's got the photovoltaic panels on the roof there. And then the image on the right is wind, sort of mini windmills that help operate the lights, along with the photovoltaic panels over the cars in the lot. And then lastly, just like LEED, there is an innovation credit. So if you come up with something particularly interesting or innovative that is inherently sustainable,